Teacher, look, the janitor is giving food to that hungry kid again. A student called out mockingly across the schoolyard. The old man said nothing, just smiled and walked away after leaving the sandwich behind. 1 week later, the entire school froze as a formation of Marines entered through the gates, each one stopping to salute him with military precision. Who was this quiet boy? And why did a simple janitor receive such profound gratitude from the armed forces? Welcome to QH. Let's uncover what really happened. Thomas Reilly, 68, had once been a transport specialist with the United States Marine Corps, serving during the final years of the Vietnam War. His weathered hands now push brooms instead of steering wheels. His uniform exchanged for the gray coveralls of Pinewood Elementary in rural Arkansas. After discharge, he rarely spoke about his past. He lived simply in a small apartment 6 blocks from the school, walking to work each day regardless of weather, carrying a modest lunchbox and greeting every student with the same gentle smile. The teachers appreciated Thomas. He arrived early to make sure walkways were cleared of snow in winter and swept of leaves in fall. His presence was so reliable that if Thomas wasn't in the hallway at 6:45 a.m. precisely, the principal would check to make sure he was all right. Few knew about Thomas's peculiar habit. Each morning he would set aside a portion of his lunch, sometimes a sandwich, other times fruit or a homemade cookie, and place it on the stone bench in the corner of the east playground. He never mentioned it, and most staff had learned not to ask. That Tuesday morning had begun like any other. Thomas arrived at 6:30, unlocked the maintenance room, and began his routine. By 7:15 he had positioned himself near the stone bench, lunch bag in hand. A group of 5th graders had gathered near the basketball court, louder than usual as they waited for the first bell. One of them spotted Thomas and nudged his friends. "Teacher, look, the janitor is giving food to that hungry kid again." The boy called out loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. Several students laughed. Dawson, the 4th grade teacher on morning duty, looked up from her clipboard with a frown. She took a step toward the group, uncertain how to handle the situation. Thomas only smiled, the same gentle expression he wore when mopping up spilled milk or fixing a jammed locker. He nodded politely to Ms. Dawson, then bent down to place a carefully wrapped sandwich and a bottle of water on the bench. Then he turned and walked away without a word, pushing his cleaning cart toward the gymnasium. The recipient of Thomas's daily offering was Mason, a 9-year-old 4th grader with solemn eyes and clothes that had seen better days. His parents had recently divorced, resulting in frequent moves and school transfer. While other children's lunchboxes bulged with carefully prepared meals, Mason typically had only a few stale crackers tucked into his pocket. Mason never asked for anything. He never complained. He simply sat at the edge of the classroom, completed his work diligently, and avoided drawing attention to himself. When the lunch bell rang, he would often claim he wasn't hungry or had forgotten his meal at home. For 3 months since Mason's arrival at Pinewood, Thomas had quietly ensured the boy never went an entire day without eating. No words were exchanged between them, just food left on a bench, and the slight nod Mason would give when he thought no one was watching. Ms. Dawson had noticed, of course, so had Principal Myers, but they respected Thomas enough not to interfere with what seemed like a private arrangement between a kind old man and a child who needed more than just academic support. What none of them realized was that Thomas's simple act of sharing his lunch would soon bring the entire school to a standstill. If you believe a warm glance and a small meal can save a child, stay with us. No one paid much attention to the fact that Mason always arrived at school early. While most students rushed in just before the bell, Mason could be found sitting on the steps as early as 7 a.m., regardless of weather, waiting quietly with a dog-eared book in his lap. Thomas was always the first to greet him. "Sleep well, kiddo," he would ask while sweeping the entry. Mason never answered verbally, just a slight nod or shake of his head. Yet something in the boy's eyes suggested this brief moment of acknowledgement meant more than the casual question implied. The morning after the incident on the playground, Mason broke their established pattern. Instead of taking the food and retreating to his usual corner, he approached the maintenance room during his lunch period. Sliding a folded piece of paper under the door, he hurried away before anyone noticed. Thomas found the note when he returned from fixing a leaky water fountain. Written in careful, childish handwriting were words that made the old man's hands tremble. "Thank you for the sandwiches. My dad was a Marine too. I don't know if he's alive anymore. but you remind me of him. Thomas sat heavily on his metal stool, eyes suddenly moist. Since Vietnam, he'd trained himself not to show emotion, but this simple message from a child who had never spoken directly to him pierced through decades of practiced stoicism. The next morning, Thomas prepared with special care. Instead of his usual leftover sandwich, he packed fresh turkey on homemade bread, an apple polished to a shine, and 2 chocolate chip cookies still warm from his early morning baking. The food was wrapped in proper wax paper rather than reused plastic bags. Mason found the improved lunch in the usual spot. Something about the care taken in its preparation made the boy's eyes fill with tears. He ate every crumb. For the rest of the week, their ritual continued with a subtle shift. Now Mason would give a small wave when he spotted Thomas across the schoolyard. Thomas would touch his brow in a gesture somewhere between a salute and a tip of an imaginary hat. Still no words, but a connection deepening beyond their silent exchanges. What no one at Pinewood Elementary understood was how those simple meals were filling more than just a physical need. For Mason, they represented the only stability in a life recently turned upside down. Then came Monday morning. The day began normal. Students arrived, classes assembled, and the usual buzz of learning filled the halls. Thomas was working on a stubborn stain in the cafeteria when the office intercom crackled. "Mr. Reilly, please report to the front entrance." Thomas wiped his hands on a rag, puzzled. In 15 years at Pinewood, he had rarely been summoned during school hours. As he approached the main doors, he noticed an unusual stillness. Students and teachers alike stood frozen near windows, their expressions a mixture of confusion and awe. Outside, a convoy of 4 black SUVs with government plates had parked in the fire lane. Standing in perfect formation before the school entrance were 12 Marines in dress blues, their posture impeccable, faces solemn. Thomas stopped halfway down the hall, his heart suddenly racing with an instinctive reaction he hadn't felt in decades. Something about the precision of their alignment, the gleam of brass buttons in the morning sun, it transported him instantly back to another time, another life. The lead officer, a captain by his insignia, caught sight of Thomas through the glass doors and spoke quietly to his men. As one, they adjusted their stance to attention. Principal Myers approached Thomas, her expression bewildered. "Do you know what this is about?" Before Thomas could answer, the captain entered the building, removed his cap, and addressed the principal with formal courtesy. "Ma'am, I'm Captain Rivera with the 2nd Battalion, 5th Marines. We're here to express our gratitude to the person who has been caring for Sergeant Walker's son." Thomas remained frozen in place, the cleaning rag still clutched in his hand. "Sergeant Daniel Walker was killed in action during our deployment to Fallujah," the captain continued. "Before his final mission, he made us promise that if anything happened to him, we would check on his son. It took us some time to locate the boy after his mother relocated, but we recently received information that someone here has been looking after him." Principal Myers turned to Thomas, understanding dawning in her eyes. "That would be Mr. Reilly, our maintenance supervisor." The captain studied Thomas, noting the straight posture that years of civilian life hadn't erased. "You were a Marine?" Thomas nodded once, his voice finding steadiness despite his surprise. "Transport Division, Then you understand what it means when Marines make a promise to one of their own," Captain Rivera said. "Sergeant Walker saved many of our lives. We're here to honor his memory by thanking the man who's been caring for his son, when we could." The reality of the situation slowly settled over Thomas. The quiet boy with sad eyes, Mason, was the son of a fallen Marine. Every sandwich he had shared was not just feeding a hungry child, it was fulfilling a sacred obligation to a brother-in-arms he had never met. Have you ever witnessed an ordinary act of kindness lead to a moment that stopped an entire community in its tracks? Share a time when you saw goodness explode into something greater. The revelation that followed transformed a simple act of kindness into something far more profound. Mason Walker was indeed the son of Sergeant Daniel Walker, but the connection ran deeper than anyone could have imagined. Daniel hadn't been just any Marine. He had served in the same transport unit that Thomas had helped establish 4 decades earlier. Though separated by years, they had worn the same insignia, driven the same routes, and followed the same protocols that Thomas had helped create during his service. Daniel had fallen during a civilian evacuation mission, using his vehicle to shield refugee families from enemy fire. He had died as he lived, behind the wheel, ensuring others reached safety. Mason's mother, Laura, devastated by her husband's death and struggling with financial insecurity, had moved them repeatedly over the past year. Their arrival in Pinewood hadn't been random. It was the last place Daniel had mentioned in his final letter home. If anything happens to me, he had written, take Mason to Pinewood. There are good people there who understand what it means to serve. Laura hadn't understood the significance of the location, only that it had been important to Daniel. Overwhelmed by grief and the challenges of single parenthood, she had quietly filed paperwork with the Veterans Affairs Office, seeking support while keeping her son's connection to a fallen hero private, even from Mason himself. It was through these records that Daniel's former unit had finally located them. When they learned that Mason attended Pinewood Elementary, they had made discreet inquiries about the boy's welfare. A school secretary had mentioned the janitor who makes sure he eats, never expecting her casual comment would set today's events in motion. As the morning surprise unfolded, students and teachers gathered in the main hallway, watching in stunned silence. Captain Rivera explained the situation to Principal Myers, who immediately suspended regular classes and assembled everyone in the gymnasium. The Marines formed a line at the entrance, each one stopping to render a formal salute to Thomas as he walked in, still in his work coveralls, utterly unprepared for such a ceremony. Mason sat in the front row, his eyes wide with confusion and wonder. Captain Rivera addressed the assembly, his voice carrying easily through the hushed space. 40 years ago, Corporal Thomas Reilly saved 16 Marines during the final evacuation of Saigon. His quick thinking and remarkable driving skills navigated terrain others deemed impassable. Without official orders, he drove back into danger zone 3 times to retrieve stranded personnel. Thomas stared at the floor, uncomfortable with the tension he had spent decades avoiding. What many of you don't know, the captain continued, is that Corporal Reilly established the training protocols still used by Marine transport divisions today. Those same protocols guided Sergeant Walker's actions during his final mission. Captain Rivera turned to Mason. Your father followed in the footsteps of the very man who has been quietly helping you these past months. 2 Marines connected across time with the same commitment to never leave anyone behind. The connection was almost too perfect to be coincidental, like the universe had orchestrated a full-circle moment of silent reciprocity. The son of a fallen Marine being looked after by the very man who had trained his father's unit. Neither aware of their connection, Laura Walker, Mason's mother, had been invited to the ceremony without being told its purpose. She stood at the back of the gymnasium, tears streaming down her face as she finally understood why her late husband had been so insistent about Pinewood. Daniel used to tell stories about old Reilly's rules. She explained later to the principal, I never made the connection. He said they weren't just about driving, they were about life. Always check who's being left behind. That was the first rule. After the formal presentation, Captain Rivera presented Thomas with a shadow box containing Sergeant Walker's unit patch, service medals and a photograph of his team. In the background of the image, barely visible on a wall, was a faded poster of transport guidelines. Reilly's rules for getting home alive. Sergeant Walker kept this photo on him always, the captain explained. He said it reminded him of what mattered most. Mason approached tentatively, looking from the photo to Thomas with new understanding. You knew my dad. Thomas knelt to the boy's level, his knees protesting the movement. Not directly, son, but in the Marines, we're all connected. Your father followed the same path I did, just in a different time. Mom said he was brave, Mason offered quietly. The bravest, Thomas confirmed. Drivers always are. We go where others won't, to make sure no one gets left behind. When Mason's mother finally made her way through the crowd to her son's side, her face reflected a complex mix of emotions. Grief freshly stirred, gratitude beyond words, and a hint of embarrassment. I should have told you who was helping him, she said to Thomas. I just didn't know, I've been so overwhelmed. Thomas shook his head. No explanations needed, ma'am. A Marine's family is everyone's responsibility. The ceremony concluded with an announcement that stunned both Thomas and the Walker family. The Marine Corps had established a scholarship fund in Sergeant Walker's name, ensuring Mason's education would be fully covered through college. Additionally, a veteran support group had arranged housing assistance for Laura and Mason, a small but well-maintained home just 2 blocks from Pinewood Elementary. We take care of our own, Captain Rivera stated simply, even if it takes us a while to find them. As the formal proceedings ended and students began returning to classrooms, media representatives who had caught wind of the story arrived at the school. Thomas immediately retreated to his maintenance room, uncomfortable with the attention. Principal Myers found him there, methodically organizing his tools as though nothing extraordinary had happened. "They want to interview you," she said gently. Thomas shook his head. "Not my style, never was. You've been working here 15 years, and I never knew you were a decorated Marine." Thomas continued arranging wrenches by size. "Never saw the need to mention it. The war's long over, but what you did, both then and now, deserves recognition." He finally looked up, his expression thoughtful. "Recognition isn't why we do things, Miss Winters. Not the important things anyway." The principal studied this man she thought she had known, this quiet janitor who had secretly been a hero twice over. "Why did you help Mason then? You couldn't have known who his father was." Thomas's weathered face softened. "Spotted him that first day sitting alone. No lunch, too proud to say he was hungry. Some things you just recognize when you've seen enough of the world." He paused, then added quietly, "No child should feel forgotten." The story spread throughout the community and beyond. Local veterans visited the school to shake Thomas's hand. Former Marines from his old unit called from across the country, sharing stories of Holler's rules, still being taught to new recruits. Through it all, Thomas maintained his routine, arriving early, working diligently, and still leaving food for Mason on the stone bench, though now they would often sit together to share it. One reporter managed to corner Thomas as he was leaving school. "How does it feel to be called a hero?" she asked, microphone extended. Thomas considered the question carefully. "I'm not the hero in this story," he answered finally. "Daniel Walker is. I just did what any of us would do. Notice a hungry child." With that, he continued his walk home, leaving the reporter with a response far more profound than she had expected. Type respect if you've ever encountered someone who sought no praise, yet received the gratitude of an entire team years later. From that day forward, no one at Pinewood Elementary referred to Thomas as the janitor anymore. Students and staff alike called him Mr. Reilly, the school's silent guardian. The stone bench where Thomas had left countless meals transformed into an unofficial monument. The Parent-Teacher Association installed a small bronze plaque nearby that read, "Here, a man who said nothing, made an entire battalion of Marines stand at attention." The plaque became a teaching point for teachers discussing citizenship and character. "Sometimes the biggest heroes are the quietest among us," Miss Dawson would tell her students. "They don't wear capes or seek applause. They just see needs and fill them." Mason blossomed in the weeks that followed. The withdrawn, solemn child gradually gave way to a boy who smiled more readily and participated in class discussions. His grades improved, and for the first time, he joined the school's science club. Each morning Mason would arrive early to help Thomas with simple tasks, holding garbage bags open, wiping down lunch tables, or organizing the tool shelf. No one assigned this duty. It was an arrangement they had developed on their own. Thomas still prepared extra food, but now they shared their meals together on the bench, sometimes in companionable silence, other times with Mason recounting what he was learning in class, or asking questions about mechanical problems that interested him. "How does a transmission work?" Mason asked one morning over shared ham sandwiches. Thomas sketched the basic principles in the dust with a stick, his explanations clear and patient. These impromptu lessons often attracted other curious students, until Thomas's lunch break occasionally resembled an informal class on practical mechanics. The Marines didn't forget their promise either. Members of Sergeant Walker's unit established a rotation with someone visiting Pinewood monthly, to check on Mason and his mother. They helped with home repairs, transported Laura to job interviews, until she secured stable employment, and ensured Mason had opportunities to connect with his father's legacy in healthy ways. Captain Rivera returned for the school's Veterans Day ceremony, where Thomas, despite his reluctance, was persuaded to stand alongside other local veterans. The photo of Thomas and Mason together, both wearing Marine Corps caps that were slightly too large for them, became the face of a regional veterans support initiative. Laura Walker found healing through her new connections to the Marine community. "For the first year after Daniel died, I kept everything related to his service locked away," she confided to Thomas during a Sunday dinner at his apartment, now a monthly tradition. "I thought it would be easier for Mason not to know too much. I was wrong." Thomas nodded, understand. "Grief makes us do strange things, but children need truth given gently." "You gave him more than food," Laura said. "You gave him a connection to his father without even knowing it."
Perhaps the most significant change came in Thomas himself. The solitary man who had walked through life quietly carrying the weight of his experiences, began to share more of his knowledge. At the principal's request, he developed a basic vehicle maintenance elective for the middle school students, teaching them practical skills while subtly imparting the values that had guided his life: thoroughness, responsibility, and attentiveness to those who might need help. 6 months after the Marine's visit, Thomas received an official letter from the Marine Corps commandant, informing him that Reilly's rules had been formally incorporated into the training manual for all transport divisions. His simple practical guidelines, developed in the chaos of wartime necessity and refined through years of experience, would now shape generations of Marines to come. When asked how he felt about this honor, Thomas replied in characteristic fashion, "They were never really my rule, just common sense things you learn when people's lives depend on your driving. Check your vehicle, watch the road ahead. Remember who's riding with you." On the 1-year anniversary of what students now called the Marine Day, a small ceremony was held to dedicate a newly established memorial garden at the edge of the schoolyard. At its center stood the original stone bench, now accompanied by a flagpole flying both the American flag and the Marine Corps standard. During the dedication, Mason, now more confident and a full head taller, stood beside Thomas as the garden was officially named the Walker-Reilly Friendship Garden. "Two Marines who never met," Principal Myers explained to the assembled students, "connected by duty, honor, and a simple act of kindness that reminds us all, heroism often looks like an ordinary person doing what's right when no one is watching." Thomas continues his work at Pinewood Elementary, still arriving early and departing late, still maintaining the building with meticulous care. His routine remains largely unchanged except for one detail. He now eats lunch with not just Mason, but any student who needs company or conversation. The simple stone bench has become a place where children who feel isolated or troubled naturally gravitate. Without fanfare or formal program, Thomas has created an invisible safety net for the school's most vulnerable students, identified not through paperwork or referrals, but through the quiet observation of a man who understands that hunger comes in many forms, and not all can be satisfied with food. When asked by a visiting educational consultant about his intervention strategy with at-risk students, Thomas offered a response that was later printed on the staff room wall: "I just figure everybody's fighting a battle we can't see. A sandwich and a moment of peace might not fix it, but it lets them know they're not fighting alone." Each quiet act, each shared meal, each unspoken word became part of something far larger than either of them knew. Thomas had not only seen a hungry child, he had reached into the void left by loss and filled it with constancy. His kindness became a lighthouse for a boy adrift, and in return, Mason gave him a reason to remember that healing is possible, even decades after the storm. Have you ever witnessed someone performing acts of kindness not for recognition, only to be remembered by an entire generation? Share a moment that made you believe even a simple meal can become a medal of honor. Subscribe to QH Incredible Stories, where quiet people are named through the gratitude of generations.